Hey there, Jon Chorba here from ReallyEasyGuitarLessons.com, and in this video lesson, I'm going to give you 5 essential tips to master bar chords. So bar chords are the bane of every guitar player's existence. I've been teaching for 14 years, and everybody I've ever taught a bar chord to, everybody struggles with it. They're the hardest thing, I think the hardest technique that there is to learn on guitar. Everybody struggles with them. Nobody gets them right away. So if you are struggling with bar chords, just know that you're in good company. Everybody has to go through it. It's just a part of the process. But there are 5 things that I think, if you implement them, they can help get you to the goal of mastering bar chords sooner. Again, you're still probably going to be a little frustrated, but if you watch out for these 5 things, I think you'll get to where you want to be sooner. So first, let's just talk about what bar chords are. So the bar technique, barring, simply refers to using one finger to hold down multiple strings. So, you could take your first finger and hold down any 2 strings, right? When you do that, when you hold down 2 strings with one finger, the technique that you are using is called the bar technique, B-A-R-R-E. But bar chords are a category of chords that when you know them, the cool thing about bar chords is that when you make one shape, you end up learning 12 chords. So for instance, this is one of the bar chord shapes that I refer to as the 6-string major shape. And depending where you do it, right, the shape is movable. So if I do it here, it's an F. If I do it here, it's an F sharp. If I do it here, it's a G, G sharp, A sharp, B, etc. So if you learn one shape, you learn 12 total chords. And if you learn a couple different bar chord shapes, major, minor, dominant 7, minor 7, major 7, well, you now have a very extensive chord vocabulary that will allow you to learn practically any song that you want to learn. But they're a massive pain in the butt, as I'm sure you've experienced on your own if you're watching this video. So let me walk you through my 5 tips to watch out for when you're doing bar chords and practicing bar chords. So I'm going to go through these 5 tips with what I call a 6-string minor bar chord, okay? 6-string minor bar chord. This is like this. I'm barring all 6 strings with my index finger, and my ring and pinky fingers are on the D, so the A and the D string, 2 frets higher than my bar. So when you make this shape, this is a minor shape, which again, as I was talking about before, is completely movable. And I want to use this shape because it's hard and it's a good thing to practice with all these tips that I'm going to talk about, okay? So the first thing that you want to watch out for, tip number 1, is to get a bend in your dip joint. This little part of your knuckle right here. This is called your dip joint. And a lot of times when I see students have problems with bar chords, they automatically assume that the problem is the bar, that's where their problem is. And oftentimes, while it is a problem, it's not the biggest problem. What I see is that the other fingers on their hand, they do what I call lay flat. That means their dip joint isn't bent, it's extended like this. And so if your fingers look like this when you're doing a bar chord, you're definitely gonna get some muting, okay? So you wanna make sure that dip joint in your finger, when you're doing bar chords, they have to be curled and you have to have a good bend in them. That's gonna get them out of the way of the adjacent strings so that your bar has an opportunity to sound good, okay? So get a bend in your dip joint, and a way you could facilitate that, if your fingers don't bend like that naturally, or maybe if you're a little bit older and you might have some arthritis, a little way to do that is just to do a little exercise that I call crouching tiger, hidden dragon. Throughout the day, you don't need a guitar for this. Just take your fingertips, touch them to your finger pads like this. You're making a kung fu fist, right? You do that, just hold it, squeeze it for a few seconds, and then release. Hold it, squeeze it for a few seconds, and release. That will help facilitate a bend in that dip joint. And also, if you've got some extra fleshy bits on the tips of your fingers, so even if you got a good bend in your dip joint, but you're still getting muting because your pinky has too much flesh on it and it's touching the adjacent string, you can take that finger and just put it on the high E string, press hard, slide it up and down, which is not going to feel good, right? But it's going to create a callus and it's going to push that fleshy bit in enough to help get it out of the way. So Tip number 1 has nothing to do with the actual bar. It's just making sure that your other fingers have a good technique and a good approach so that they're not getting in the way of the adjacent strings and they can make the chord sound nice and clean. And then tip number 2 is watch your thumb position, okay? Oftentimes I'll see students when they're trying to do bar chords, their thumb is trying to come up over the top, right? What over the top means is peeking out over the top of the neck, okay? If your thumb is coming up like this, you're never gonna get into a good configuration to get a clean sounding bar chord. So your thumb needs to be, at the very least, in the middle of the neck and underneath where your index finger is. But I'm gonna tell you to take it a step further. So your thumb, when your thumb is underneath your index finger and you're trying to do the bar, what ends up happening is the muscle or tendon that you're using is right here in your hand, right? You're trying to pinch into the bar and you're using this part of your hand for all your power, right? Well, this is very weak compared to your wrist and your forearm. So a way you can activate your wrist and your forearm and help you get more oomph into your bar and also have less fatigue is take your thumb and move it more towards the body of the neck. So if I'm on the 3rd fret here with this minor bar chord shape, I'm gonna take my thumb and I'm gonna scooch it so it's kind of more underneath my middle finger and also gonna be in the middle of the neck. I'm peeking it out just so you can see where it is. So I'm moving it more towards the body, underneath the middle finger, and it's more in the middle of the neck, okay? The more you come this way, when you go to bar, instead of pinching, you start twisting into the bar, which this activates your wrist and your forearm, which are way stronger than your hand muscles. And it allows you, again, to get more oomph in it, and it's also less fatiguing. When your thumb is right here and you're constantly pinching into it, it's a great way to wear your hand out quickly. So take your thumb, move it more towards the body, try that out, and that will help you get your bar chord to be cleaner. Then tip number 3 is to roll your index finger towards the headstock. So our index finger is improperly designed for bar chords because right here on this knuckle right here, well, if you're trying to do a 6-string minor bar chord, that part of your finger is right on the G string. And if it's laying flat on the G string, you're gonna just get muting, and then you're gonna feel like, oh, I gotta press harder, I gotta press harder, I gotta press harder. Don't just press in harder. You do have to press a little bit harder than you normally do, but it's not all about pressure. Take your finger, your index finger, and rotate it so it's on the side of your finger. I'm rotating it towards the headstock so that I'm bypassing this flat part of the finger and I'm more on the side of it. And especially when you combine it with what I was talking about in the last tip where you adjust your thumb position. When you move your thumb position here, and then that allows you to twist into the chord, and then that just naturally allows your index finger to roll like that. Okay? So roll your index finger on the side towards the headstock. And tip number 4 is basically a last resort, especially if you've got an acoustic guitar that's either cheap or has really high action. You could be doing all these things and you still just need a little more oomph to get your bar chord right. And so what you can do is take your strumming hand, right? So I'm gonna take the elbow of my strumming hand and I'm actually gonna push the strings into the chord. Now, you can't really do this all the time, always, especially if you're strumming really, really fast. But just to kind of get you over the hump with this, take your elbow and just use leverage to push the strings into your fingers. Again, I'm still moving my thumb this way. I'm still rotating my index finger towards the headstock, and I've got a good bend in my dip joint on my ring and my pinky finger. But if I could just push a little bit more into this, you push the strings into my fingers as opposed to pushing my fingers into the strings, it creates a little more leverage. And especially if you've been playing bar chords for a bit and your hand's fatigued, this could just kind of alleviate a little bit of that fatigue. And the last tip I have for you is to practice bar chords both in isolation, but also changing from open chords to bar chords. A common problem that I see is that students learn bar chords and they practice them by themselves, right? They just spend so much time trying to get their fingers in the right spot and getting the bar chord to sound clean. Now that's important, right? This is what I mean about talking about practicing it in isolation. Form the chord and then don't strum it. All right, if you strum it, you can be like, oh, that sounds pretty good. But if you pick each note of the chord one at a time slowly, that will identify any problem areas. So if you're doing it and you hear that muting on the G string, that is the signal that it's like, oh, I either need to adjust my pinky finger or adjust my bar so that that G string can ring accurately. Because if you're playing a 6-string minor bar chord, right, it's very important that that note ring out, okay? If it's muted, it's not really a minor chord. Okay, so you want to practice it in isolation, like so, right? But you also want to practice changing into it and out of it. So I'm going to take that minor shape that I was just doing on the 3rd fret. I'm going to scooch it down to the 2nd fret, which is now an F sharp minor, and practice changing from F sharp minor to A, or from F sharp minor to E, right? So you can take some open position chords and bar chords and start practicing changing between them, because that's what's going to happen when you're playing actual music, right? You're not just going to be on a bar chord in isolation and have all the time in the world to play it. So what happens, like I said, students will practice in isolation and then they go to learn a song that's got that bar chord in it, but now they have to get to it from a chord and they have to get out of it to another chord, and the changing is weak, okay? So spend some time practicing changing between open chords and bar chords. So for this F sharp minor, A to F sharp minor will work, and E to F sharp minor will work. And this is a good one to practice because it's very difficult, right? Going to a 6-string minor chord is challenging, so spending some time going to that will be beneficial. But for most strumming songs, the ones that I would really focus on would be like G to the F major, or C to the F major, or G to B minor, or D to B minor, right? If you focus on those, right? C to F is a big one, G to F is a big one, D to B minor, or G to B minor, right? So just changing between those specific open chords and those specific bar chords, very useful. And if you want the ultimate challenge, do the 6-string minor, A to F sharp minor, or E to F sharp minor. All right, that's it for this video lesson. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.